watching from my window, the curtain coming down. A blue as black as warning, a silence like a sound that rattles at the cages that hold my heart and mind. I call my name to wonder just what I hope to find. A bird so high above the fray, what should he mean to me? His crooked song gone crazy, the swaying arms of trees that wave to me like the hungry waiting for the tide. My tipping boat still hoping I might reach the other side.
Welcome everybody. It's very meaningful to have Rhiannon Giddens singing I'm on my way, because she is on her way to the Ojai Festival in June of 2023, June 8th through 11th. Rhiannon, it's just great to be with you in any form, including video. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see your face.
There are many, many people who are new to the Ojai Festival, so let me take a minute to tell you about it. Ojai is an incredibly beautiful small town located about an hour and 20 minutes north of Los Angeles, sort of in the mountains behind Santa Barbara. And the festival takes place over 4 intense concert-packed days in June 8th through 11th of next year. And each year, a music director is chosen to curate the festival. And having first visited Ojai last year in September of 21, it was just the most heavenly match and the most immediate and obvious thing to ask Rhiannon to come back in 23 and curate the festival herself. We'll talk about some of the programming throughout this hour, and near the end of the hour, we'll have time for those of you who are watching and listening to ask some questions in the chat. We're delighted to welcome you. Rhiannon, last September when the festival ended, my wife and I drove to the Bay Area for a wedding, and we took the slowest road imaginable and the most scenic. And on the road, we listened to your very beautiful Spotify audiobook, memoir with music called To Balance on Bridges. And that not only it's amazing content, which I highly recommend to everybody, it remains available on Spotify. But also just the thought of that title has stuck with me, To Balance on Bridges. And so much of what you do and how you live is captured in that phrase, and we're living some of that in Ojai. In fact, we have a piece called Liquid Borders and another piece called Between Worlds at Ojai. Can you talk about that title a little bit and how it represents both your life and your musical values?
Yeah, I will say I think it's on Audible. It's an Audible original.
Sorry, not Spotify,
Yeah,
Audible, my
yeah.
mistake.
Audible. Yeah, I like supporting Audible. I think they do a really wonderful job. And they said, would you do this? And I really sat down and thought about, like, what is it that is my, I won't say superpower, but I kind of feel like the way that we are raised is the way we look at the world. And so that's our tool. That's what we use to see the world. And then sometimes it's a negative thing and we have to kind of adjust, but then we learn by doing that. It's always something that we can learn by thinking about. And so the thing that was one of my earliest memories is being mixed. And it's kind of a weird thing it's not really like there was one concrete memory of being mixed, but it's just like very many times of either being shuttling back and forth between the white and black sides of my family, being constantly asked, what am I? I was just talking about this earlier today. It's like, I don't think people who are, from one culture, or like, especially in this country, like, people who look white or raised in a certain way where they know exactly, like, there's no question about where they are in the firmament of American culture, right? It's not just white people, I suppose, but it's when you haven't had to deal with that, you don't really know how it feels, to be constantly questioned, because then you start questioning yourself and you start going, who am I then? It's like, if nobody can tell what I am, and then what does that even mean? And it just really, when I would have to fill out a form and I would see two boxes for race, and it'd be black, white, and you go, well, what does that mean? Then of course, what does that mean for all the people who aren't either? It's a constant question. So I think it's been part of the reason why I'm drawn to what I say in the Audible is, like, I'm drawn to the edge. I'm drawn to the points of connection, because that's kind of where I've lived all my life. I've always felt like neither nor, without until I realized that I'm actually all of them. All of the things that I am exist within me at the same time. I don't have to choose, you know. But that's a kind of a radical concept in a country that wants to put everything in a box and label it and sell it. So I think it's just something that, I mean, it very much is why we're here having this conversation, because the year that we're preparing for next year is all about, the margins and the mixtures and the crossroads and all of those things. And I think that the reason I'm drawn to that is because it is a fundamental part of my identity, which is questioning that.
And it obviously plays itself out musically, multiple ways. And we'll talk for a second about the lovely Oberlin shirt you're wearing, which is one musical chapter in your life. In music too, we're very hung up on genres. Back when Tower Records existed, there was a hermetically sealed classical room, and there was blues, and there was jazz, and there was folk, and there was, and the Grammys maybe is the height of extreme categorization. And one of my favorite moments, I've been meaning to tell you this since we met, there was a time in the early days of Apple Music when you looked up Schubert's Winterreise, its genre was blues. And what better blues piece is there than Schubert's Winterreise? It's about as blue as you can get. The Oberlin chapter of your life was focused on opera, which may catch some people by surprise. But even before we talk about that, what was the soundtrack of growing up? What was in your ear?
A lot of different stuff. I think my parents kind of gave me the gift of eclecticism, or whatever the noun of that is. I would have heard sort of course, pop music and VH1 and TV and these things, radio stuff, but I was never really drawn to super pop music. I was in a choir, so I was learning kind of American folk songs, like written in choral arrangements or Benjamin Britten or whatever. And then, I would have heard a lot of folk music from like the 60s, not the roots stuff that I, got into when as an adult, but, the revival stuff, the sort of commercial folk revival, Peter, Paul and Mary and those kind of guys, because my parents were into that. And but then I kind of took a turn because I was a super nerd. So I was like into They Might Be Giants, and I got into Tom Lehrer from my godmother, and really got into sort of cerebral lyrics and sort of catchy tunes that weren't necessarily pop tunes. So yeah, it was a mixture of stuff. And then I got into country music, and and also would have heard a tiny bit of classical. Like my mom was into Andre Segovia, and I had one Yo-Yo Ma CD that I had memorized the entire thing. It was like some Haydn cello concerto and Dvorak. It's like an early one of his CDs, and so it was kind of like that. Like I had a mixtape that had like Bohemian Rhapsody, like the Haydn cello concerto, yeah, Reba McEntire. You know what I mean? That was kind of me before I got to college.
And then you get to college. Where does opera come into the picture?
Um, I discovered kind of the idea of singing when I was 17. I went to a math science boarding school when I was in high school, and discovered I did not want to, in fact, do math and science. But I went to a camp, like sort of a summer school um, thing for choir in my rising as a rising senior, and I discovered like musical theater kids and all of these like music people were like, "Yeah, I'm going to be a singer for a living," and I was like, "Oh, that that's a good idea. I think I want to do that. This is fun. These people are fun." And I went into opera because they don't speak on stage. That was literally my decision. I auditioned at two schools. I auditioned at Carnegie Mellon and Oberlin. And I know it was Carnegie Mellon was a little bit more of a musical theater school, and Oberlin was more of an opera school. And I was like, I don't want to talk on stage. I hate speaking in public, which is ironic given how many speeches I give now. But that was it. That was me. That sets the pattern of my life. Like, that sounds cool. Let me go do that thing. I don't know how hard it's going to be until I'm there and it's too late.
You mentioned once when we talked that I think it was 4 or 5 operas you did at Oberlin, and I never asked you 5 of them. What were they, or what were some of them?
I was in the Tinderland and in the choir. That was my first opera. And then I was in Carmen as Mercedes, and then I did Juliet and Romeo and Juliet, and then I did Fiordiligi and Così fan tutte, and then I did Manon and Manon. It was a wild ride for an undergrad. I mean, I was like, I don't know, it was crazy, but I got a lot of experience in college. And then when I went to grad school, I took a year of grad school and I did 2 more operas. I did the North Carolina premiere of Little Women. Mark Adamo actually came down and worked with us a little bit. And then Susanna, which I thought was going to be my last operatic experience, but it wasn't.
Well, and in the wonderful way you include everything, music from Susanna still turns up in your concerts and on your records, just in slightly different guise.
Yeah, it's a brilliant piece, and I've wanted to do Trees on the Mountains as an actual ballad for a really long time, so it was really cool to engage with that.
I might, if I can put in a request for Ojai on the concert you and Francesco do, maybe there's a place for that. You sing it so beautifully.
All right, we'll see what we can do to accommodate your request.
And then from my knowledge, sort of your next emergence to the world, which I'm sure wasn't the day after graduate school, was Carolina Chocolate Drops. Connect that arc. How did that change and that interest emerge?
Well, it started actually at Oberlin. When I was still at Oberlin, before I started doing the main roles in the operas, I discovered contra dancing, which is an American folk, a form of folk dance. And I discovered that because I thought it was a flyer for English country dancing, which is what they do in the Jane Austen novels. And I'm a Jane Austen nut. So I went to see what it was like. And it was contra dancing, but I stayed anyway because I was like, this looks kind of cool. And I got hooked. And then I kind of had to give it up because of the operas were just, too busy. I was too busy at night. And then I came down to North Carolina after I graduated Oberlin, and there was a really thriving contra dance scene there where you could just go to multiple dances if you were willing to travel. And I got hooked into it and found my community there. And then all of the music being played for those dances in like Greensboro, a lot of it was old time music, which I had never heard. And I was like, what is this? what the banjo is, sounds so different. It's like amazing. And that was how I got into the banjo. And then through people there, they told me about Joe Thompson and, well, CC Conway, who wrote the book about, the banjo being African, or an African American thing. That, she wrote a whole book called African Banjo Echoes in Appalachia. And so I read that. And then she told me about Joe Thompson, the lone Black string band musician from that school, from that old tradition, Southern tradition, left alive, like still playing and, singing in Mebane, North Carolina. So it's really funny. Jane Austen led me to Joe Thompson. So I'm very grateful. But that's the way these things kind of is what I tell the kids that I, when I'm teaching or going in to talk to young music students. I'm like, you have to live, you have to live and do things that are not related to your classical training, because that is what might lead you to a thing that you didn't know that you're going to be interested in. And then you can apply what you're doing to that or whatever, it's, you have to live outside the practice room, because otherwise, what do you have to say, in life? So that was a really great example for me of the next chapter of my life coming from me just being interested in something that had nothing to do with classical music, and to be able to come back full circle with Joe Thompson's tune and, the opera, Omar, is just, it's a lot of amazingness to sort of be a part of that. But yeah, that's how I got into the banjo, and also the mission of it, like learning it was an African American instrument, and kind of go, wait a minute, why don't we know that? Why don't we know that? And the answering that has been driving me for the last 15 years, is the why don't we know that? Why is the narrative completely the opposite of that? There's a lot in there.
And maybe this is the moment to tell everybody about just a series that's been a revelation to me on BBC Radio 4 called Black Roots, which Rhiannon has hosted and produced. There are 3 episodes that are readily available online, and my colleague Gina Gutierrez from the Ojai Festival has put the link. I can't recommend it highly enough. And the motto of it is, why don't we know this? It's integral, central elements, not only of American musical life, but just of American history. And my experience, Rhiannon, and I assume this is at the core of why you and Justin Robinson and so many others are doing this work, is just to make the history more whole, more complete.
This is it. I mean, you can't talk about the American experiment without talking about all of it. And like, that's this desire to separate and the box is very integral to the American identity as much as the desire to come together. It's a really interesting, like, polar opposite push me pull you thing that's been going on since the founding of the nation state, which is based on a lot of really horrible things. And I think music is one of those examples that can create a space where, some people are going to be defensive no matter what, and there's nothing you can do. But I think for some people, it's a way into the history that doesn't feel threatening, because it's like, I'm just talking about verifiable things that happened in music history, and they really show the best and the worst of kind of who we are. Like the fact that the banjo itself comes out of a culture of slavery, like that. It is literally, we would have no banjo if we hadn't had transatlantic slavery. And that's something that needs to be faced, and it's like, you can say why? Well, because like it's an emblem of something completely opposite of what it actually is, how it started out. And I think there's a lot of American history like that. And so what happens is that people like believe these folks when they go, we're actually very different, and like, don't listen to them because like, America is here for this one particular kind of people, and we've never come together. Like, there's never been interracial couples until the last 50 years. Like, all this is bull, I mean, it's like there's been mixing from the get-go. It's just, how is the history written? And this is, something that I can talk about through music. And it's, I just think it's more urgent than ever, given the state of division that we have in this country. And the more that I know how deliberate that is, the more we can understand how deliberate it is, the more we can actually have a chance of defying it.
And it's even shutting out episodes of hope, because the first episode of Black Roots is about a Black musician in North Carolina who, at the peak of his fame, there was horrible destruction, as you will hear when you listen to the episode, but at the peak of his fame, played to mixed audiences in North Carolina in the 1880s, 90s, somewhere in there.
Before, I think it was early, a little bit earlier than that, but in the 1800s, the mid to late 1800s. Yeah.
And that was a revelation in and of itself. I'm happy to say, for those of you who know and love Carolina chocolate drops, Rhiannon and Justin Robinson, who's one of her fellow original chocolate drops, will be reunited in Ojai, and in fact on a number of programs, but one of the programs we're doing in Ojai is the first performance of a concert suite for singers and the small ensemble from the opera Omar, which I hope will also give it concert life beyond where it can be produced in opera. And we're framing it in Ojai with music from Senegal, from where Omar himself, Omar ibn Said, originated, and then music from the Carolinas. And we will have a Senegalese musician, Sekou Keita, playing on that program in Ojai, and Justin Robinson, who lives and breathes music of the Carolinas, on that program as well. And this juxtaposition of an operatic life at Oberlin and some years later Carolina chocolate drops, both of those streams come together in Omar, don't they?
Yeah, it was like an opportunity for me, because it's Spoleto, the folks at Spoleto asked me, to write Omar. And so you kind of get to the, what is it that I have to say in the story? I'm not writing this as an African composer. I'm not writing this as a Muslim composer. I'm writing this as me, from North Carolina. And obviously he has a very, very strong component of his story is in North Carolina. I know North Carolina, so particularly the part where he comes into the United States, and when he comes up to North Carolina is kind of surrounded by the sounds that I've been steeping myself in, for the last 15 whatever years. And it was an opportunity to, the folk music, the borrowing of folk tunes in music is a long storied tradition in classical music, and so, I mean, I just put actually one of the tunes I learned from Justin, or from Joe, in the opera. It's this idea of what would he have heard? What would he have heard? And of course, like, I'm not going to know exactly what it would have sounded like back then, but it's like the DNA of what he would have heard is in that song. You know what I mean? In some way. And that's the whole point of the whole opera, is like, none of it is literal, but it's all true. You know what I mean? Even the made up stuff, because all the made up stuff is based on a lot of history. It's like, it's coming out of stories that I've read and that I know. And so it's an interesting kind of realism that's created, and then the production itself kind of just like adds layers onto that. But yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity to then take, the inspirational things that I have in my ear before putting them in the opera. And then, Michael Abels, who's my co-composer for that, engaging with them in an orchestral way, to have the actual sounds of the fiddle and the banjo, because we are the inheritors. Me and Justin and Dom Flemons, who's the other original Chocolate Drop, are the inheritors of Joe Thompson's, music in a cultural way. Like Joe Thompson taught a lot of people. Joe Thompson was a black fiddler from North Carolina who was like the last in a long line of string band musicians, black string bands. I'm just like contextualizing this because it's not something that people know. Black string bands was like a really, really important piece of American musical history that's been almost erased from the narrative. And they were, like everywhere, not just the South. They were in the North, they were in the, and they were the sort of jukeboxes, in the 1800s in particular. And they were very, very 16, 17, 1800s. And they were, they played for all the functions you can imagine, but of course, especially for dances. And so, Joe came out of that tradition and he passed on his family's music to me, Justin, and Dom, who were the only like group of Black people who like studied, like really apprenticed with him, because nobody else in his family took it up. So we feel that responsibility very highly. And that's the core of the Carolina Chocolate Drops' first performances. And the mission of the Chocolate Drops was spreading Joe's music and the story of Joe. So putting that in the opera was kind of a no-brainer, because like, even where he ended up is not like he ended up in the mountains or, on the coast. He ended up in Wilmington, which is not that terribly far from the Piedmont area that Joe was from. So it'll be really cool to juxtapose like the fiddle and banjo, with the operatic kind of translation of that in a way.
In its original operatic setting, the opera is currently in production at LA Opera, and there are 2 more performances this Wednesday, November 9th at 7:30, and the final performance on Sunday, November 13th at 2:00. And if you're within reach of Los Angeles, I urge you to get yourself there. It's an extraordinary, compelling piece with a fantastic cast and a beautiful production. The opera tells the story of Omar ibn Said, who was a Senegalese Quranic scholar, a very learned man of faith, who was captured and enslaved in the New World, first in South Carolina, with a particularly cruel slave owner. He fled, he escaped, he ran away, and was jailed in North Carolina, and filled his jail cell by writing on the wall Quranic verses in Arabic, which brought him to the attention, if there is such a thing, at least of a somewhat more sympathetic and understanding slave owner. And the opera tells his story. Omar, in 1831, in Arabic, wrote a personal memoir that's also a devotional, a statement of faith. And the opera represents the strength of his faith, even his integration, in a sense, or encounter with Christianity, and his ability to fold that in, which is both in the memoir and I think accurately represented in the opera. But one of the many touching things in the opera, Rhiannon and her fellow composer, Michael Abels, refer to and incorporate material that is so resonant, beginning right with the overture. I'm so touched by what the tune of the overture is, Rhiannon. Could you talk a little about what that represents?
The overture, that when you do the history of African-American history, Afro-Caribbean history is difficult because, there's so little, in terms of enslaved people were not considered important enough really to write a lot about, or, so you have a few memoirs, you have visitors from Europe, you have slave owners writing about people that they owned, and the people themselves, of course, are working too much and too hard and are kept illiterate on purpose, to write these things down, which is why Omar's account is so valuable, because they're so rare. It's the only one that exists in that we know of a personal account in Arabic. And there are other personal accounts, but they're either written through somebody else or they're in other languages, which is fine. But this was just a really interesting one because it also reminds people of how many Muslims there were that were brought as enslaved people to the Americas and to the Caribbean. So it's like I try to use as many. I try to put it as many sort of touch points of existing material, just a few of, just to kind of put in a bit of ancestral juju, I guess. And so it starts with this tune, Coromantee, that was written down in the late 1700s by a free man of color. I think Mr. Baptiste we don't know his first name, but at the behest of Hans Sloane, who was a trader and had written sort of observations about what he saw on Jamaica. And he had this guy write down the tunes to some of the music that were being sung by these enslaved, members of the African diaspora. And so it begins with one of those tunes, and there's material from another one also. And then I expand the tune now, and I add like a third and a fourth part and and then I put there's a viola solo in there, and then there's, and then Michael does his magic, and it takes it even further. But yeah, it was important to me to put they're anonymous. We will never know their names, but, just to put a little bit of the folks who came before and who, on whose shoulders that we are here, telling.
We'll take a musical break with music from Omar, and this is Rhiannon singing Julie's aria with Bill Frisell and Francesco Turrisi. You will sing the role of Julie for the first time in Ojai, which I'm really happy to say, although you've beautifully recorded Julie's aria. Just set up the moment in the opera where she sings this, and then we'll turn to the music.
And just so that people know, this is a vernacular voiced version of this. This is down in my sort of microphone voice, and not the classical voice that it is in the opera. Because a lot of people ask me, actually, is this for like opera singers? I was like, yeah, it's an opera. It's really funny because they're not expecting it, because they're like, you're a banjo player, what's going on? It's at the point in the opera where I had to, Omar escapes from his first owner, and the bottom part of South Carolina, and ends all the way up in the middle part of North Carolina, and he was like 37 when he was stolen. So he's in his late 30s back then, which is kind of like add 20 years, right? In terms of like, because there's no healthcare back then. So he made it all the way up to the middle part of North Carolina, and I had to figure out a way to get him there in the opera. So this character named Julie strolled onto the scene, and she, through the magic of drama, she manages to tell him about this plantation in North Carolina that he should go to. And so he makes it up there. And so when he sees her again, he says, "Why did you help me?" And she says, because you see it earlier in the opera, he says something in Arabic, and she recognizes it. And she realizes that, that he's a Muslim. And so she wants to help him because, as she tells him in the aria, "My daddy wore a cap like yours," and the cap there's a whole thing around that, because the head must be covered, and she manages to give that back to him as well. And, basically all of these aspects of my father's religion, I recognize in you, and I wanted to to help you.
So here's Julie's aria from Omar with Rhiannon Giddens, Bill Frisell, and Francesco Turrisi.
My daddy wore a cap like yours. He got down on his knees and he faced the rising sun, and he did it again when the day was done. He wouldn't eat this and he wouldn't eat that, no matter the lean, no matter the fat. He drove my mama crazy, but she loved him anyway. They found each other in the darkness. The way they looked at the world wasn't the same, but the way that they looked at each other, there was the flame. They sold my daddy down when I was 10. I've never grown as fast as I did then. The last look in his eye was for me and her. I'll never forget the family we were. No matter what they say, our hearts beat red, just like theirs. No matter what they say, our tears get shed, just like theirs. Some men, they came a-courtin' after that, but they ate all the lean, they ate all the fat. They drove my mama crazy, and she sent them all away. Find each other in the darkness. The way we look at the world isn't the same, but the way our hearts can see each other, there is the flame, there is the light. It ain't no shame to hold on tight to memories, to histories, to feelings. It's healing. So remember it all. I do. What else do we have?
So that's Julie's aria from the opera Omar, and it's currently on at LA Opera, and in June of next year, a more intimate chamber version that also incorporates material of music from the Carolinas and Senegal, will premiere at the Ojai Festival. And a piece written in collaboration with Michael Abels, wonderful composer. And one of the, I will just say personally, and I've had a chance to tell Michael and Rhiannon this, it's such an extraordinarily seamless collaboration among the two of you. You've just sort of melded into one brilliant composing mind. So hats off to Michael as well. And Michael may be known to many of you for his brilliant film scores to Jordan Peele's Get Out and Nope. And he's at work on a new film on the composer Joseph de Boulogne. So more good things. Rhiannon, you're a great collaborator in terms of the musical partners you choose, and a lot of them will turn up in Ojai, but I think pride of place has to go to one collaborator in particular, Francesco Teresi, who's both a central person in your life musically and personally. And I still, being somebody of confused, completely blurred identities myself, I love the notion of you and an Italian musician who plays every instrument I've ever can imagine. Both for you living in Ireland just adds to the stew. How did you and Francesco meet, and what has that collaboration on the musical side brought to you?
Yeah, it's kind of like we both recognized in each other the impossible. I mean, it's just like, I really can't imagine anyone else who can do what he does and fits with what I do, because it's like, he said many times, when you look at what we do on paper, there's no overlap. There's just no overlap. It's like, I went to school for Italian opera, he went to school for American jazz, and then like he took, a road down into early music, and I took a road down into string bands, and then he got into, Mediterranean music, and I was into, Celtic music. There's just no, it's just really funny. We don't play any of the same instruments. We met some years ago when he's got a really, as he's got a really unique sort of imagination for what sounds can go together, and they're kind of, he's a real collaborator as well, and has invited a lot of different kinds of musicians to work with him in Ireland, and created these really beautiful recordings. And he's really a genre crosser in so many ways, and he heard the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and as a jazz musician and sometime teacher, like he's taught courses on jazz music, he knows the history, and he heard the Carolina Chocolate Drops, and he was like, this is the missing link. Why does nobody talk about the black string bands, and he just had this idea that the sounds that I was doing, and the sounds that he was, experimenting with, Mediterranean, for lack of a better word, would sound good together. And so he sent me an email.
Wow.
That was it. And as he always likes to say, I didn't reply to the first one. But he sent another one. And of course I was like, yeah, I think this sounds really cool. And we got together and played, and it was like, wow, this is really neat, and when we first played together, I didn't even know he was a pianist. He just played, percussion. So, but then we could never make anything work. And we had all these grand plans that never came to anything because of scheduling. And some years after, he reached out again, and we just happened to be in the place in our lives also that we were, not with our previous partners anymore. And so our personal relationship and our musical relationship, kind of, it all happened together, because that's who we are, and that's what we found in each other, was another person who lived their music and the philosophy of their music as fully as they did, because he's also talks a lot about immigration and, discovering the real the real roots of where European music comes from, where there's a lot of, stuff from Arabic culture and the instruments and all that kind of stuff, when you think about like Arabic Spain and stuff that people don't like to talk about anymore. And he's trying to, as somebody who also holds dual identity as a family is Sicilian, but he grew up in the northern part of Italy, and thinking about like how we talk about music. So he's basically doing on the other side of the ocean what I was doing kind of in America. And so it was a really, I was so intrigued with that, and just, yeah, we couldn't ask for I think a better partner, either one of us. Like I can follow him in so many different things, and he can follow me in so many different things. So it's pretty cool.
There's a lovely example of that at work for those of you who have Apple Music. Rhiannon and Francesco have put together 6 programs on Apple Radio, of just curated playlists from multiple cultures, and just traveling the world through their imaginations is a great ride. You mentioned fellow travelers. A bunch of other fellow travelers in yet another facet of your life will turn up at Ojai. The Chinese pipa player Wu Man, the Persian Comanche player Kehan Kalhor, and then the multiple talent string players Maz Swift, Mario Goto, Karen Uzunian, and Sean Conley, all of whom variously, separately, together at times or full-time, play with the Silk Road Project, of which you're artistic director, having succeeded and collaborated with the same Yo-Yo Ma who played that Haydn cello concerto on your mixtape. Talk a little about kind of the breadth of what Silk Road represents for you, in a way of sort of fellow travelers, just once again taking a road defined by music.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of yo-yos, of like, you never meet a stranger. Like it's all about listening. It's all about listening. We can always find points of connection if we simply listen to each other. And one of the reasons why music is such an easy conduit for that is because that's what you have to do to make music. You have to listen to the other person. When you're having a conversation, there's not, well, I guess you can play music not listening to the other person too. I have played with people like that, but it's a lot funner when you're listening to somebody, and if you can listen hard enough, you will find, you'll find that familiarity that speaks to you, and you find where those points of connection are. And I think the whole idea behind the Silk Road Ensemble is that, you have the Silk Road, which is this conduit, this major conduit of culture, which is always exemplified in music and food and, and visual art. You find this conduit, going through all these different regions, and then, really influencing so much of what's going on around there. And it's a brilliant idea for an ensemble. It had been going for 20 years when I sort of came in, starting to have talks about perhaps taking over. And so for me, it's like the immediate thing was like, well, all of those cultures exist within the United States, but we like to pretend like they don't. You know what I mean? We like to pretend like it's the United States versus the world, but it's like, well, the United States is made up of the world, in addition, of course, to people who are native to the land of the Americas, and so being able to come in and to kind of bring an American perspective, and to go like, how do we talk about America in a global context? How do we get away from, like, say, the Grammys, where there's one category for, it used to be called world music, and then they made a huge change and they called it global music. I was like, what is the difference? It's still one category, and that's unfortunately a big issue. I feel like with our outlook, we just kind of have this, insulated thing, but it's like, there's all of these cultures exist here, and are a big part of why we are who we are. So, there's some people who say the Silk Road actually just kept going through San Francisco, because so many people came from Canton in China for reasons of, imperialism, came into the United States through San Francisco, and it just keeps on going. So, we're doing a big multi-year project about the Transcontinental Railroad. It's thinking about how movement creates culture, and changes. You are changed and you change when you move, and the people who are there where you get to are are changed themselves. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of stories to tell.
One, this could be a huge diversion by itself, so I'll just touch on it. One whole aspect of the early recording industry, the same record companies would create multiple labels for different audiences, including race records for a Black audience, but virtually unknown Turkish records for Turkish immigrants, recorded in 1912 in New York City, and Ukrainian bands, and whatever it was, and each was segmented to be separated and only targeted to each community. And what I like to think of as what you and Silk Road do is take that historical tendency to separate and look at the intersections.
This is it, because that's coming from a commercial sense. All genres are coming from commerce, because what they want to do is sell. They want to sell things, and so they have to put it in a box to sell it. And the irony is that it's not all negative, right? That was a snapshot of what was going on in America at that time. And even a lot of people don't even know that was what rejuvenated Irish traditional music, was the records coming back from the States. Irish musicians in the States being recorded in Chicago, New York, and they're going back. I remember talking to a lilter, Seamus Fay, who's an amazing, I don't even know if he's still alive now. He was pretty old when I talked to him, but he was incredible lilter. That used to be a thing, whatever. And they had these incredible memories for all these tunes. And he remembers listening to these records, learning tunes off of these records when he was young, with his mother, and they would lilt together. I mean, so, it's not all negative, but what happens after that is that then these things get ossified and codified, and a lot of the other ethnic records sort of faded away as people assimilated into American culture, but the race records and the hillbilly records is what kind of went on to then keep fomenting further divisions in American commercial music as that started to, and we're grateful to have that snapshot, but it is just a snapshot. And what we tend to do is take that snapshot and then say, this is the way it has to be now for forever. And it's that's death to innovation, really. And so the story of American music is people, fighting that and crossing those bounds and coming together despite those categories, and then continuously being resorted into ever new named categories, which are all simply, just the same old thing, just with new names and with, further breakdowns, within them. So it's just crazy. It's just all to sell records,
We want to tantalize you with one more bit of music. This is from the 2021 Ojai Festival, and it was Rhiannon's first meeting with Francesco Turrisi with the Attaca Quartet. And maybe you can say a word, because I had a sense that it was kind of an instant bond with you and the quartet. And we'll listen to a live performance from Ojai last year at the Purchaser's Option. And then when we come back, we'll do a few minutes for questions. So please take the time, and if you have questions, write them into the chat, and we'll take 5 or 10 minutes to respond. But it was a happy piece of matchmaking, introducing you and Francesco to the Attaca Quartet.
got a babe, but shall I keep him? 'Twill come the day when I'll be weeping. But how can I love him any less? This little babe upon my breast. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. I've got a body dark and strong. I was young, but not for long. You took me to bed, a little girl, left me in a woman's world. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. Day by day, I work the line. Every minute overtime. Fingers nimble, fingers quick. My fingers bleed to make you rich. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, you can take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul. You can take my body, take my bones, you can take my blood, but not my soul.
So that's at the purchaser's option from the 2021 Ojai Festival with Rhiannon Giddens, Francesco Teresi, and the Ataka Quartet, and a lot more where that came from next June 8th through 11 in Ojai. And by the way, I saw a question in the chat. It ain't Ohio. It's Ojai California. So as you look up the festival, and we'll post the link. I looked at a couple of the questions, Rhiannon, and somebody asked a question that I've been meaning to ask you. Who are hero singers for you? Who are singers you love and admire in whatever genre or all genres?
Gosh, I really love Nina Simone is like the obvious choice, but as an artist, I love her, and I love her singing. It's just very Yeah, I don't know. There's just something about the way that she phrases things. It's really amazing. Aretha Franklin, another obvious one, but like just incredible. You know, she's like a masterclass by herself. Um, I love like Ethel Waters, you know,
Mhm.
that early kind of vaudeville kind of singing. Um, there's a lot of great singers to listen to. Uh I really I'm trying to remember, there was this I can't remember her name, but when I was in Oberlin there was a classical singer I used to love to listen to a lot, other than Renee Fleming, who of course is, you know, uh everybody wants to be when they're in college, when they're a soprano. Of the modern singers, you know, because people ask me that too. I'm reminded because we just shared the stage a couple of days ago. I think Amethyst Kia is probably one of my favorite singers in terms of like the sound that she produces is just so unique to her, but it's just so incredible. And it just, she did a solo at Carnegie Hall. We did a sold out show in Stern, Our Native Daughters. It was an amazing experience. That was just a couple nights ago. And she did a solo with her banjo. Um, and it was just like the whole place went nuts. You know, it was just a real great experience to just hear that sound in that hall. It was pretty great.
This is a group called Our Native Daughters who've made recordings and videos that Rhiannon is central to. So just yet another facet of Rhiannon's life that I commend to you. And maybe that's Friday night was Carnegie Hall. What you all don't know, unless you heard us chat at the beginning, is that Rhiannon sang with, was it the Charlotte Symphony last night? And next Saturday is a concert at Disney Hall with in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Philharmonic. And somebody said, "How do you do it?" And I'll tell a personal story. And I don't know how you juggle all of this, but I will report that whenever we've spent time together, I've been floored at how completely focused you are at the task at hand. So if you're distracted, you mask it well. How do you juggle all of it?
I stay, yeah, the focus is true. I just, you know, wherever I'm at, that's where I am. You know what I mean? So I one of my probably my deficits is that I don't prepare enough way ahead of time. So there are a few things that almost caught me out, like doing Porgy and Bess earlier this year, for example. I showed up on the first day, not nearly as well prepared to sing Bess or my first operatic role in 18 years as I should have been. And I made it through and it was ended up being great, but it was a very, very stressful time. So I'm learning a little bit more. But you know, with stuff that's in my wheelhouse, when I'm there, I'm 150% there and I'm focused on doing that thing. And then when that thing is over, I turn to the next thing and then I'm 150% focused on that thing. All of those things, you know, usually the usual stuff, not the opera stuff, you know, it's stuff that I've been doing for so long that, you know, I just have to focus on what facet of it is at that moment. You know, it's a little crazy. It's a little too much at the moment. I'm gonna be honest, but you know, yeah, but it's I'm keeping it together barely.
Um, Joanne Ferrari, by the way, we're getting nice notes from Toronto and several people who just heard you at Carnegie Hall. Some Divine, I think Davine said, "I was going wild in Carnegie Hall. You were all phenomenal." A nice question from Joanne Ferrari. Can you speak to more jazz style songs such as The Love That We Almost Had? And if that's an avenue, jazz style creativity and performance, that you're tempted to explore further?
Yeah, I am in a, you know, through kind of my own lens. That was a co-write with a wonderful singer-songwriter named B. Beeman. If you don't know his work, you should check him out. He's really an interesting writer and a fantastic guy, this old like 60s soul voice, you know, coming out of this. You wouldn't expect it to come out of him because you don't expect it to come out of anybody these days, you know. And obviously my partner is a trained jazz pianist. So there, I think we have a whole nother life, ahead of us of exploring that. I'm not a trained jazz singer. I kind of scat. I'm a fake scatter. Like I don't have any training or have not really spent a ton of time with the American Songbook. I like early jazz, like I'm really into the 20s and 30s, and that stuff I feel really comfortable with. But we have a couple of projects in the works actually, dealing with the subject of jazz. So that'll be some future things to come. So yes, that's the plan.
And Sherry Lott said, where do you find inspiration in Ireland, North Carolina, or wherever? And there's some beautiful videos, if you and Francesco together, music videos on the coast in Ireland. I wonder about the role of physical landscape in grounding you in your wide traveling life.
I'm a very much like live in my brain kind of person. Those videos were during lockdown, and so we were locked down in Ireland, and so we made the whole record and all the videos in Ireland, working with Irish people, whether born there or have moved there, and which was actually kind of special because it's something we never would have done, otherwise. And so I think I'm really proud of those videos. Like there's a lot of DIY about them, and but we also worked some really super talented people, like the dancers and the videographers and all this kind of stuff. We were kind of directing everything. And yeah, I think that I draw inspiration from people more than places. I'm not an outdoor person, although I do love being outside and it's really nice, but I definitely draw, more inspiration from people. And like when I think about where my home is, it's with people. It's like with my kids, it's with Francesco, it's it's with my parents. It's not necessarily a place, just because we move so much. We're moving from place to place all the time, so I have to try to maintain a core that's not attached to the land. But it is beautiful there.
A couple of people, and I'm switching back and forth, somebody who, Gina Carvalho, I think, who was with you in Patmos, wanted to thank you for the beautiful contribution of your children's book, Build a House, which she has given to many delighted children. So I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that, on top of all these other wonderful activities. And Vicky Rashbaum Horowitz said the same thing. Not a question, but a compliment. Just bought 3 copies of your new children's book for my grandkids and other kids. Build a House. I totally loved the song, and now all the illustrations in the book as well. And I'm going to do Gina and Fiona something impromptu. We should sign off in a couple of minutes, but we'll sign off by playing you the beautifully produced animated music video of Build a House from Rhiannon's book. And that's what will go out on as a gift to everybody. But Build a House is yet another story that needed to be told, and telling it to children is an important piece of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that song, kind of during the protests of the lockdown, and just thinking about the last 400 years of history. And I write in ballad form, and ballad form is very simple. You get 2 lines per stanza to write, because it's repetitive and or whatever form you're choosing. And that's just what came out for me. And so that kind of lends itself actually to a kid's book, because it is very direct writing. It's very direct, simple, not necessarily easy, but and so Candlewick is my publishing house, and they're a wonderful children's publisher, and they saw the vision in making Build a House into a kid's book. And it's just really gotten a lot of great response, particularly from educators, which is what really makes me happy, because I feel like they know they know what's good for kids because they're always reading to kids and they're always, noticing what kids are responding to. And I think that we give kids a bum rap sometimes because we don't think they can handle things. There's a lot that they can handle if it's properly, framed, and if it's said in a way that is not expecting them to understand sort of complex things that they're not, losing your home, being treated unfairly. These are really basic concepts, and kids get it because they've been treated unfairly. Like they've lost things. They feel really big feelings. So they're really able at this age. And I think this is the age, it's the 5 to 8 range. This is the age to really kind of give a framework for how to talk about these feelings and how to talk about these big pieces of history that, need to be talked about. So I'm really, really happy that, that it seems to be something that people are really, and I read it to some kids, for release week, and it was a really illuminating experience, and we're just like right there, like, that's not fair. What? And at the end, they love to see that little girl with their banjo and the family, and they get it, and it hopefully will then open the door for it. The people who can't talk about it are the parents. They're the ones who have a hard time. So hopefully it's a way to kind of just break the ice about some of this stuff and open the door to just talk about these things in a really direct way to kids.
I think talking about important things in a really direct way is the motto of so much of this work, and I hope to work together that we'll do in Ojai at the Ojai Festival next June. We'll honor that in expected and unexpected ways. I'm really, really just thrilled to be working with you, Rhiannon, and we're cooking up some really wonderful things together. In the meantime, if you're anywhere near Los Angeles, Omar, 2 more performances at LA Opera this coming week, and Rhiannon with the Los Angeles Philharmonic next Saturday night. And Build a House, a children's book just published last month and out to the world. And we'll go out, for those of you who want to stick around, with the newly created animated music video. Rhiannon, thanks so much for this and everything you have done and that is to come. It's just great to be with you.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to next year.
You brought me here to build your house, build your house, build your house. You brought me here, build your house and grow your garden fine. I laid the brick and built your house, built your house, built your house. I laid the brick and built your house, raised the plants so high. And when you had the house and land, the house and land, the house and land, and when you had the house and land, then you told me go. I found a place to build my house, build my house, build my house. I found a place.